In my family, there's this absurd rule. If my older sister Audrey can't go on a date, then neither can I. It's frustrating, but I made up my mind to go on a date anyway. I carefully planned it out. My sister was sequestered in her room, and my dad was working late. I chose one of my mother's elegant dresses and borrowed her perfume. I believed that if she were alive, she'd definitely support my decision. I felt confident in my appearance, and I was sure Luke would think so too. Luke and I had met online, and he had been eager to go on a real date with me for months. Our first date went splendidly. We even shared a passionate kiss in the back row of the movie theater. Luke mentioned that he had a surprise in store for me, and I was intrigued. Towards the end of our date, he took me to an abandoned building with a breathtaking view. While we gazed at the scenery, he leaned in for a kiss. Just as our lips were about to meet, my phone suddenly vibrated. Panic washed over me. It was my dad, persistently calling. Feeling compelled to answer, I picked up. He inquired about my whereabouts, and I hesitated before falsely claiming that I was studying at my friend Josiah's place. Then he dropped a bombshell. Oh really? Since when does Josiah live on a rooftop? And since when is Josiah a boy with his hands all over you? My heart froze, and I instinctively crouched down in disbelief. Could my dad have been following us? My father continued, Hazel, you come home right now before I come over there and give that boy a piece of my mind. Next time you disobey me, don't choose a building across the street from my office. After my dad abruptly hung up, I peered over the edge of the building, and there he was, standing in his office, arms crossed, and sternly staring at me. I was in deep trouble, not only barred from dating but also essentially grounded for what felt like an eternity. Why did my life have to be so miserable? My dad reminded me of his ridiculous rule, and I shot an accusatory look at my sister Audrey. I couldn't help but ask Audrey why she couldn't just be normal and get a boyfriend herself. In response, she merely laughed and proclaimed that all boys were idiots before slamming her door shut. I missed Luke desperately. He didn't even attend the same school as me, so seeing him there was out of the question. Nevertheless, I eventually hatched a plan. I had no certainty if it would work, but it was worth a shot. I created a fake Instagram account and sent a message to Audrey. I didn't anticipate her responding, so I was taken aback when she did. We engaged in a conversation for about an hour, and she even sent me a selfie with lipstick on. I had to suppress my laughter as I headed to her room to knock on the door, but she yelled at me that she was busy. Little did she know that I was the one keeping her occupied by pretending to be this mysterious, attractive guy. I played along for a few days. Then Audrey surprised me by suggesting that we meet in person. Panic set in. I tried to avoid it, but she persisted with her requests. I honestly started to feel a bit sorry for her. Could she really be that desperate? So I called Luke and asked him for a favor. I requested that Luke pretend to be the guy I had invented and go on a date with my sister. He was initially reluctant, but eventually agreed when I told him it would enable us to see each other again. All he had to do was go on one date with Audrey, and my dad would likely allow me to date again. It seemed like a foolproof plan, didn't it? On the night of their date, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. It was Audrey asking if she could borrow a pair of heels. I nearly choked on my drink at the sight of my sister in heels. I couldn't help but tease her, asking, "Who's the lucky guy? Come on, spill the beans." But she simply threw a pillow at me and insisted it was none of my business. I couldn't wait to hear all the juicy details about their date. Luke had promised to text me throughout the evening, but strangely he didn't. When I finally heard the front door open, I immediately called him, a bit miffed. However, he assured me that everything had gone well and that Audrey was even interested in a second date. That wasn't part of the plan, though. The next morning at breakfast, my sister had that unmistakable look of someone in love. It made me feel a bit queasy, to be honest. Our dad could tell something was up, and when Audrey asked him if she could go on a second date, I quickly interjected, saying that I had a date lined up too. But then came the worst news ever. My dad declared that the only way I could go out was if it were a double date with Audrey. I couldn't believe my luck. How on earth were we going to manage that? I called Luke and explained this absurd situation, and he mentioned that his friend Charles would join us as my date. It was incredibly unfair, and I couldn't help but wonder what I had gotten myself into. Nonetheless, it was better than not going out at all. The four of us ended up in a restaurant, and Luke sat next to my sister. She kept reaching out and touching his face in ways I had never seen before. However, Luke began to play footsie with me under the table and winked whenever Audrey wasn't looking. After enduring Audrey's relentless flirting for 30 minutes, I reached my breaking point. I excused myself and headed to the bathroom. When I returned, Luke was waiting there, saying with a sigh, "Sorry, babe." I confronted him about his flirting with my sister, and he simply said, "Babe, I'm just a good actor." What can I say? I wasn't satisfied with his response. Luke was my boyfriend, and it didn't sit well with me. When we returned from the bathroom together, my sister appeared angry and gave Luke a passionate kiss on the cheek. It made my stomach turn. Later, when we got home that night, she started berating me, accusing me of flirting with her boyfriend. She declared that he was coming over the next day to watch movies and warned me to stay out of her way and leave her boyfriend alone. I couldn't believe her audacity. Since when did she start thinking of him as her boyfriend? I told Luke that he had to break up with her, or else I'd reveal everything to her and he would lose me forever. He promised to do it the next day. After about 30 minutes of watching a movie, my sister fell asleep on the couch. Luke tiptoed over to me, and we decided to hang out in my room for a while. He assured me that he would end things with her when she woke up. However, our plans took an unexpected turn when we heard the front door open. It was my dad. Panic set in. Luke swiftly climbed out of my window and dashed across the backyard to the gate. I rushed into the bathroom and pretended to take a bath. That's when I noticed a pregnancy test in the trash can. I was stunned. Was my sister pregnant? A whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind. Could the baby be Luke's? I can't explain why I did what I did next, but it's something I'll probably regret for a long time. I took a picture of the test and sent it to Luke. I anxiously awaited his response, but it never came. I had lost him, and it was entirely my fault. A part of me prayed that my sister was pregnant with someone else's baby. However, my worst fears were confirmed later that night when I overheard her on the phone with Luke. I heard her use his fake name, Caleb, the name I had concocted. I was torn. On one hand, it was my own ludicrous idea that had led to this mess. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that Luke was just as responsible for this mess. He was only supposed to play a role, not genuinely fall in love with my sister. My anger intensified, and I could hear my dad pottering around in the kitchen. I stormed in, holding up the pregnancy test, and revealed that Audrey was pregnant and it was my boyfriend, Luke, who was responsible. My dad looked like he might faint, and Audrey barged in, screaming at me, accusing me of jealousy and resenting her happiness. I couldn't bear it any longer, so I confessed everything, that I had created Caleb, an imaginary character, and Luke had pretended to be him. Audrey's expression turned from anger to nausea, and then she burst into tears, declaring that she had to terminate the pregnancy. My dad glared at me and called me cruel, questioning my sanity for concocting such a deceitful scheme. I felt overwhelming shame. All of this mess was a result of my desperate desire for a boyfriend. Not only had I lost Luke, but I had also shattered any chance of my sister ever wanting to speak to me again. Overwhelmed by guilt, I rushed to my room, packed a bag, and slipped out unnoticed. My dad was too preoccupied with scolding Audrey to notice my departure. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't bear to live with the monstrous act I had committed. My sister was now pregnant, tangled in a web of deception and lies. I felt like a heartless monster. I roamed the streets aimlessly, contemplating returning home, but I knew I wouldn't be welcome there. I even considered going to Luke's, but he was equally responsible for the situation. In the end, I found my way to a youth shelter where they offered me a place to stay for free and the possibility of a job in the future. I ended up volunteering at a foster and adoption home for babies affiliated with the shelter, and it turned out to be a rewarding experience. Over the course of a few years, I witnessed one baby grow into a 2-year-old, sparking thoughts about Audrey and the possibility of having a niece or nephew somewhere out there. Determined to find them, I tried to trace Audrey and her child. They had moved, and I had sold my cell phone when I was first homeless, so I had lost their contact information. However, one of the staff members at the foster home overheard my quest and thought the name sounded familiar. He rushed to the file cabinet and retrieved a file with my sister's name on it. To my astonishment, my sister had put her baby up for adoption. It dawned on me that the baby I had watched grow into a sweet 2-year-old was none other than my nephew, little Charlie. That explained the special bond I felt with him. Trembling with anticipation, I dialed my sister's number. Would she hang up on me? When she answered, I recognized her voice, and tears welled up in my eyes. She was crying too. I revealed my location at the adoption agency, and an hour later, she and my dad rushed over. They apologized for my leaving, even though it was me who had walked away. My sister, her eyes filled with emotion, looked around, hoping to see her son. When she spotted him, she broke down in tears, repeatedly expressing that giving her baby away had been the second biggest mistake she'd ever made, the first being her fake relationship with Luke, which had torn our sisterhood apart. Now we were reunited, and I continued working at the adoption agency, cherishing my role there. As for Charlie, the situation was complex because my sister couldn't regain custody after giving him up for adoption. However, I could. I began the process of adopting my nephew, paving the way for us to become a happy family once more. We never heard from or spoke to Luke again. That chapter was firmly in the past.